Hi, in today's video, we will dive into something very powerful, Assistant APIs. I will walk you through assistant creation, modification. We will dynamically retrieve all OpenAI models, look into available tools of Assistant API like file search, code entrepreneur, understand how to attach files to the vector store for file searching, and create a simple chat to chat with our assistants. So wherever you build a custom CRM, marketplace, or internal tool, this video can be helpful for you. Assistant creation is possible on the playground of OpenAI, not only through API. You can name your assistants, give some custom instructions like your helpful assistant. You should provide answers on that topic and that topic. You can enable tools like file search, code interpreter. For file searching, we can attach some files, and this assistant will be able to give you replies based on this information on these files. Also, there can be different response type, like text. We can change the temperature, top P. It will enable, based on this topic, some more creativity, or it will be more strict to the system instructions. But today we will focus mostly on API integrations, so how to implement changing the name, system instructions, model, upload files, and code entrepreneur directly in the bubble via API. Before connecting OpenAI APIs, let's create a data structure. We will need an assistant data type to store some information about our assistants. Then for chats, we will need a data type called chat and a message to store our messages. Inside, actually also for messages, we will need to create an option set that would be a message type. Let's specify at the end that it's option set for better navigation. So the message can be a reply of AI. Let's call it AI, and it can be a user message. Then we return in our message and create a field called type OS, and we choose message type from our provided options. So when someone creates a message, a user, we will create a message called this message type user. And when we get the reply from OpenAI Assistant, we would create a message with type of AI. Like this, we can identify either it's a prompt or it's a response. To store the response or prompt, we will need another field called body. It will be text. Then for privacy rules, if you want to get access to the chats and messages only for people who create them, we will create extra field user with field type user. We already have a creator field, the default one with data type user, but I prefer to create extra one because like this, we have ability to modify the user wherever we want. But if we don't have this field, we can change actually creator of this message if we need to. Then for chat, actually, we can also add inside the message an assistant data type. So like this, we also specify what assistant was used to create this message. So for messages, they are done. Then for chats, basically, we will need user. So we can identify who created this chat. And we will need an assistant data type as well. So we can identify what assistant was used for that. For assistants, we will just have an ID where we will store ID of OpenAI. We can also give them a name, I think. So we could filter all assistants by their names. We need to be sure that this data is secured. So we need to set up a privacy rules for them. For the user, we will set up that only this user can see the information about this user. Then for messages, it will be similar. So the current user rule, let's name it like this, copy. And let's say that this message user is current user. So basically it means that if I am the person who created this message, then I can see all the fields of these messages, find it in the search, and view attach files if we have some. But for everyone else, they will not be able to see anything. We can also add that this user should be logged in. Because if we don't specify it, there still can be some cookies inside the tab and user can continue seeing some information. about the messages even if they logged out. And we don't have, let's say, navigation from the chat page on the login page automatic. So it's better just to specify that it should be also logged in to see this information. Then it will be a similar rule for the chat. Only a chat creator can see the chat. So this chat user is current user, and current user should be logged in. And let's uncheck everyone else permission. For assistant data type, let's also create another field called live, and it will be yes no field. Default will be no. It means when we create a new assistant, we don't need to specify that it's live no. It will be automatically created with live equal no. We will use this field, let's say for this case scenario, then when you create an assistant and you don't want it to be live for everyone else immediately, you only want it to publish when you finish working on it. So we will have a privacy rules that only the admin can see all the assistants, but everyone else will be able to see assistant only if it's live. Actually, let's also create roles for users inside our option sets. So option set role, create, and it will be normal user and admin. And let's add this information inside the user data type. It will be role, option set, and the field type will be role. We can enable that it's automatically user, and then when we create other users, when we want to specify that someone is admin, it will be admin role. So again, assistants privacy rules. Admin privacy rules. So it will be current user role is admin and current user is logged in. They can see all the assistants and all information about them. Then another normal user. So current user role is user and this assistant live is yes. So if user has a user role and this assistant is live, then they can see information about them. Everyone else will not be able to see this information. So normal users will only see live assistants, but admin can see all the assistants, if either they live or not live. Okay, after we are done with our database structure and privacy rules, the next step will be actually connect all the necessary API calls. The first thing is create an assistant. You can see on the right side of the API references of the OpenAI, the curl type of API call. For API integrations inside the bubble, we need to go in the plugin sections and click add plugins. You can find API connector and install it into application. API connector is a plugin that allows to connect all different kind of APIs directed to the bubble. So let's click add another API, name it assistant, and let's start adding our calls. So you can see that it has endpoint. We can copy it. It's a URL. Paste it here. Let's delete this double quote. After that, we need to copy content type and add it in the shared header because content type will be the same for different API calls that we will integrate into Bubble. So to not duplicate it in each call, we can add it in the shared header and it will be shared between all of the API calls in this group. So content type is application JSON. AI Assistant API is in beta. So we can add it also in the shared header, OpenAI beta, and it should be value of the assistant equal v2. So the last thing in the header, it should be authorization. Authorization should be a private key in the header. So what is the purpose of authentication? It's basically for the security purpose. So you need to generate a secret key inside your OpenAI account like this, and you need to store it somewhere that no one can access, and you don't need to share it with anyone for security purposes, because if someone has your OpenAI secret key, they can access all the assistant APIs that you created, let's say, and they also can use it for any models in all possible API calls. So they would be able to basically spend your tokens on OpenAI and get access to the assistants and all information that was stored on the OpenAI. For generation of OpenAI token, you need to go on the platform.openai.com in the API section and click create new secret key. You can provide a name, let's say test, and click create secret key. Copy that, go in your header, type PRR space and enter your secret key. After that, you are done with setting up the security. Let's continue with our call. You can copy the body of this API call and change the type on post, the same like we see it here. So it's post, it means we create something new. You can choose in this drop down what are the type of your call. Get, it means that you will get some information from OpenAI. Post is create something new. Delete is delete something, put a budgets for modification. So we create a post call called create assistant. It will be used like action. You can use it like data or action. Data, it's like you can retrieve it somewhere, and action, you can use it inside the workflow like a different action of the flow. So in our case, we need to use like an action. After we paste our provided body and make some of the parameter dynamic. So instructions, you choose the test information inside the instruction value. You can delete it. And for creating dynamic parameters inside the body, you need to create parameters like this. So basically a value of a name inside this signs. So let's say instructions. And if you click around, you will see that you created a key. You need to uncheck that it's private. If it's not private, it means that we will be able to dynamically populate value from some inputs directly in the call and create assistants with our instruction that we provided on the page. So the name will be another key. Then tools, we can actually just remove all of this and provide value like this, tools. And another thing is the model. So before testing this API call in our workflow, we need to initialize it first. And for initializing, we need to provide some test data. So let's say for instruction, it's just helpful assistant, then name test1, tools. For now, we will not provide any tools, so it will be just 2 square brackets, and model would be GPT for all. After we are done with setting up, we can click initialize call, and you can see that it's created an assistant. This is the assistant ID. It also provides some other information that we inputted. So the name, model, and instruction. So also temperature and top P are populated like default values. So we click save, and we are done with creating the OpenAI Assistant API. Now let's create a separate page called, let's say, admin page, and build some simple front end for creation of assistant. We can go and click on this drop down, click new web page, and name it admin page. Let's say it would be just a sidebar. Let's change the container layout on column. It would be a sidebar group. Let's say we would have a drop down on top of the page where would display of all our assistants. So it would be do a search for assistants, and we would show the name of this assistant. It will not be beautiful design, just for testing our assistant APIs. So let's still put some padding, maybe at a background color. Okay, maybe let's not have any colors. So we would choose our assistant or create new one. Then we would have input for a name. Let's say name of the assistant. Let's group it together. Also, our assistant will have an instruction. And let's make it convert to replace element type on multi-line input. So we would have different display. It would be something like 120, let's say. Let's increase a bit our sidebar. And add some gap. So instructions. Then we need to have some kind of toggles to enable file search and code interpreter. Let's integrate another plugin in our application. It would be our dev kit, I think, that has our toggles. Let's go again, plugin. Canvas UI elements. Install, and we can have our toggles. It would be canvas toggle. So it would be canvas toggle. Let's make it raw. Let's say it's file search tool. And inside the file search, we would have a button to add some files. Let's copy this group and do the same for code. So we built some basic front end for our assistant. Now let's also add a new button saying create new assistant. Okay. So when we create our assistant, when we click button, the steps would be add workflow. Then inside the plugins, we can find our assistant API that we created. Assistant create assistant. So also we forgot about the models. So yes, we need to also add another group. It would be model. And we will populate that here a bit later. Let's return to create an assistant. So for model, I think default one can be this model GPT 4.0, and later we can modify it. So tools will be 0, name, actually, we can even remove this parameter from the API because it's not mandatory, and name can be added later in the modification. Actually, we don't even need anything. The parameter that is mandatory is only model. So actually, let's not even do anything except models. So you can leave it like this, enter initialize, and you can see that we still create an assistant. And all other parameters will be added during the modification, and for that, we will need to use another API. So let's return. When we click create an assistant, we actually just run our workflow assistant create assistant, and after that we will create a new thing called assistant, add all fields. So ID would be result number 1, ID, it's ID of an assistant that OpenAI provide to us, live, no, and name, we can leave name empty for now. After that, we can navigate on the page, on the same page that we are on, admin page, and send the ID of this assistant inside our URL. By adding it inside the URL, we will be able to retrieve information directly from the URL and modify it later. So we will add more parameters in the URL called assistant, and the assistant value would be step number 2, unique ID. And basically, that's all for creating an assistant. Also, the default value for the assistant from the dropdown could be get data from page URL, and we will retrieve assistant from the URL like I said. So it will be a parameter called assistant, and type would be an assistant. Like this, when page is loaded and we have the assistant parameter in our URL, it will be dynamically populated here like a default value. For the next thing, we will need to have retrieve assistant call. Retrieve assistant call is API call that gives us ability to retrieve all the information about this assistant basically. So let's go in our plugin, collapse this one and add another call. It will be retrieve assistant. It's I think it's a get call. Yes, get call. So let's copy URL endpoint, change it on get. And as you can see that it's similar endpoint like previous call, except we have this path at the end called assistant ID. It means that we will dynamically put assistant ID in the URL, and like this we can identify which assistant we need to retrieve information for. For this, inside the bubble, you need to use square brackets instead of curly brackets. After we replaced our curly brackets with square brackets, you can see that we have key, assistant ID, and value that we will dynamically populate on our workflow. You need to uncheck it that it's not private, because if it's private, we will not be able to dynamically put value inside this. Again, we need to initialize it, so we can access some test data from our previous call where we created the assistant by clicking manually enter API response and just copy assistant ID here. Copy and paste it here. Like this, we will initialize the call and get some information about it. As you can see, it shows us when it was created, model use, tools, and other information. So save it, and let's return to our front end. Now we need to specify what is the data source of this group. Let it be assistant, retrieve assistant. You can see that it's data from plugin types. So from our API call that we call retrieve assistant, it will be data of type of content. Then the data source will be get data from external API. And we can see again, assistant, retrieve assistant. We need to dynamically populate the assistant ID. And as I said, we are sending in our URL assistant information via parameter called assistant. So assistant ID would be get data from page URL, parameter, assistant, and type is assistant. You can close it and assistant ID would be ID. The field that we created called ID, not unique ID. Unique ID is the ID of the item and database of Babel, but we need actually ID of OpenAI Assistant that we are storing there. If you remember, when we create an assistant and we save the ID of the assistant like ID of this data type called assistant. So we provide the assistant information and we will dynamically populate it inside our inputs, multi-line inputs. So we would be able to retrieve information from assistant and display it in these elements. So to do it, we need to provide the data source in each group where we have this element. Otherwise, we will not be able to gradually display information from one group to another, from parent group to child group, and etc. So for this group, it would be, again, retrieve assistant and data source parent group information, right? Then the same for another, retrieve assistant, parent group, and for all other groups we have. So for name, now we can put initial value. That would be parents group retrieve assistant, name. Then the same for instruction, initial value will be parents group retrieve assistant, instructions. Then the same for model, parents group model. Actually, we need to replace input on the drop down. So let's do it. Convert, just click here, replace, and it will be drop down. So default value would be parents group achieve assistant model, and it will be dynamic source of other information. So tools, we will return to that a bit later too. The next step would be retrieve all the models. Inside the API references, you can find the API call called list of models. Let's copy that, go in our plugins page, create new call called list models. It will be get data, and it's what we need. Just copy our URL endpoint and paste it here, initialize, and you can find all the available models of OpenAI. With this information, we can dynamically display it inside our dropdown of models. Save, return on our front end, and for this dropdown of models, dynamic choice would be a list model. Choice source would be get data from an external API, list model, current list model data, and here it will be list model data as well. So option caption is what we display, and we will display ID. It's the name of all models, and here default value will be, actually let's change it on just the text, because like this, each item ID, and here it will be just displaying ID like that. So type of choice text, choice source assistant list of model each ID, current option, and default one will be parents group model. That's all for now. Next API that we would need is modify assistant. Let's return to our API reference and find it. Modify assistant, copy the name, let's collapse it, and create new call. Name it, it will be post request, copy our URL endpoint. As you can see now, again, we need to provide dynamically value of the assistant ID. So we need to use square brackets, and it will be used as action. Let's uncheck the private checkbox and copy our object body. Paste it here, and you can see that again, we can create dynamically instructions. Key here, then the same we can do for tools, and for model. Also, we can add here name, so it will be just a name, double quotes, and dynamic value of a name. Uncheck that it's all private, and provide some test information, so we actually could initialize the call. Retrieve assistant, so let's copy again assistant ID, paste it here, then instruction helpful, tools, it will be just 0 tools for now, model GPT for O, name test 5. So let's initialize, and it's done, it's changed. You can see all the information that we updated. Response form and auto, so save. Now, what we want is, let's say when we change the name here, we would want it would modify it immediately in our assistant. For this purpose, let's go in our workflow and create a custom event. This custom event would be modify assistant. And we can go in plugins and find our call, assistant, modify assistant. Assistant ID, again, we can retrieve it from the URL, get data from URL, assistant, and type of assistant. And ID would be an ID. Then instructions. Let's name our inputs so we would be able to easily navigate between them. Input name, multi-line instructions, drop down models. That's all for now. So assistant instruction, multi-line instruction value. Tools, let's leave it for now like this. We will return to that. Model, drop-down model. Name is input name value. So we created a custom event that we can use every time when something is changed in our input. There is actions inside the workflow that is called an input value is changed. So when something is changed inside the input, we trigger this workflow. And so let me show. Let's say input name is changed. When input name is changed, we want to run this custom event. And let's do it. So we will be able custom event, regular custom event, modify assistant. It means that every time when we change something inside the input name, it will trigger this event and modify it actually inside the assistant. So now we need to do the same things for all our inputs or dropdowns. So when input is changed, input of multi-line input, let's just mark them all blue. I pasted the same custom event. Then when input of model is changed, we will run the same. And for now, that's all. We will cover the tools a bit later. For the testing purpose, I created new user with admin role, so we would be able to see all the assistants, regardless it's live or not. You can click on the preview button and access preview of your application. In the dropdown, we can see all of the assistants and create new one because currently we have 0. But before creating new assistant, let's slightly modify our workflow of creating one. Because we are displaying the name of the assistant here, let's actually save the name of the assistant like ID as well. So we would at least display something in the dropdown after creation. Now let's click create button. And after clicking that button, we can see that in our database, we created new assistant with the ID and name is equal to this ID. After we modify some inputs, it will modify the assistant as well and some data related to the assistant data type. So let's try to type something like test4. You can see that it started to run some workflow. Actually, it didn't update the data inside our data type because we didn't modify it. So we can go in our custom event and do the next step, make changes to think. And make changes to think would be, we would change the assistant. Again, we have the assistant data type in our URL, so we can retrieve information and modify it. And we would change the name based on the previous step. Step 1, name. So now, after we update the name here, it will be updated in our database as well. So test 5, and you can see that it's updated here as well. So now every time when we run modify the inputs, it will modify the real assistant as well. Now let's try to use debug mode to actually see what's happening. We can close this tab and click on the preview button again. So we would have the debug mode parameter in our URL that allow us to have this bar below. We can click on step by step to actually see what's happening. Click on the create button and see that we create the assistant data type, and navigate on the same page, sending the parameter of the assistant in the URL. So now if we change the name, test 6, we can see that it trigger input name value is changed and trigger custom event that we created by modifying the assistant with our parameters here and making changes to the assistant data type. So now, even if we refresh the page, it will save the data. So it modified, we can refresh the page, and this data is saved. The same will be with the models. So we can update it on GPT-4 Turbo or other models that we have. And after that, this will be modified in the current assistant via API. The last thing that we miss in our Modify Assistant OpenAI API is tools. As you can see that inside the tool parameter, we can provide a list of tools. It can be type file search to enable file search tool, and also it can be code interpreter to enable code interpreter in our OpenAI Assistant tools. So what we need to do is to go inside the Modify Assistant, find our Assistant Modify Assistant API action, and inside the tools we would need to have some parameters. So we need to check. We have two toggles, Canvas toggle file search and Canvas toggle code. So let's say if um, Canvas toggle file search is checked, it means that someone toggled it on, we can format its text. So if it's on, let's check if Canvas toggle code interpreter is on as well. So we would say Canvas toggle code is checked, yes. So in case they are both on, we would provide inside the tools two types. It would be code interpreter tool plus file search. So we would put a square brackets and then say put code interpreter plus file search. Let's copy it from the example here as well. It looks like this. So again, we are checking. File search is on. Yes. Is toggle of code interpreter yes as well? If so, we would have two of these tools in this parameter. If only file search on, we would provide the value only of the file search here. So again, let's put square brackets and enter it here. So it would be only file search. Then if file search is checked yes, okay. If it's no, we need to check again if code interpreter yes or no. If it's yes, then we enable only code interpreter because in the previous action we saw that file search is off. If toggle of code interpreter and file search both off, then we would provide empty list. So like this, we would have all case scenarios. So we can have both of them off, enable only file search. Sorry, there should be a code interpreter there. Basically, what we did dynamically in Modify Assistant API looks like this scheme. We are asking, is file search on? If it's on, true, then we are checking, is code interpreter on as well? If they both on, then the value that we provide in the Modify Assistant API would be the next. If file search on, but code interpreter is no, then we would provide this value. That would be just file search. Then if file search on, no, we are asking a question, is code interpreter on? If so, then the value would be just a code interpreter. If they both no, then the value would be an empty list. And it's the same what we did here inside the tools, inside the bubble. To do the same things like with inputs. But instead of input is changed, we need to use special element action called canvas toggle is changed. And we would choose canvas toggle code. Let's make it blue and run trigger custom event modify. Then we can copy and just change the canvas toggle on file search. Refresh our page. And after that, we can enable the toggle and see that it triggered the value and trigger modify assistant. Modify assistant, and we can see that value is only file search. But apparently it didn't work because probably we provided some value with S spaces inside this dynamic. So let's just copy these values from our scheme, because probably the structure is recognized not like one line and they have some spaces. So it could be an issue inside the API call because it should be JSON structure should not be broken. So we copy it. Here should be only file search. Let's delete code interpreter. Then we are going into code interpreter check in leave only code interpreter. Now I think we shouldn't have any issues. So again, let's enable file search. and it was successfully. Then enable code interpreter. And as you can see, after enabling two, we already have the value of two of them inside the list. And everything was successfully done. But if we refresh the page now, you can see that they didn't stay on because we didn't put any initial value inside the toggles. But since previously inside the API of Retrieve Assistant, we didn't have any tools, we can't recognize actually if it's enabled or not. We need to have some kind of conditions. So we need to take the ID of assistant that we know for sure have some tools. So it would populate dynamically some value in the initialization of the API call. Let's copy that ID and paste it inside the Retrieve Assistant API. So we paste it and reinitialize the call. And now you can see that inside the tools, we can see that it has type code interpreter and type file search. So we can copy this value, code interpreter, file search, save it. And here we will say, actually we need to provide Retrieve Assistant dynamically again to this group as well. So Retrieve Assistant, parents group assistant, and the same as here. And inside the toggle, we would say parents, Retrieve Assistant, tools, all of the types contains its code interpreter, but it should be file search, so let's just duplicate it here. So basically it says that if tools, type of tools contains code interpreter, then this toggle will be on. Then here should be if it contains file search. So to not make any issues, any mistakes, let's just copy file search name from here. So when it contains file search, it would be on. And now after refreshing, it should be on in theory because for this assistant we enabled it. Yes, and it's become on. So now if we do some changes, it will save the information, and even after refreshing, it will stay in the same position like we did right now. So if I disable code interpreter now and refresh, it will stay disabled. After enabling tools of the assistant, we need to upload files. And it's slightly different to upload files for file search purpose and code interpreter. So for code interpreter, what we need to do is upload file on OpenAI and just attach files to the assistant. But for the file search, there is the difference that we need to create a vector store first. And then we would attach this vector store to the assistant, upload file the same way that we did for code interpreter, and then already attach this file to the assistant vector store. So let's start with uploading files and attaching these IDs to the code interpreter. For this, we will need to create another API. This API endpoint can be found in the documentation like all others. Let's copy and create another call. Upload file. It would be the post API and action. What we need to do is provide the purpose. And it's important to use the form data in this case, because form data body type allows to send a file via API. And this is the one thing that we need to do. So the key would be the purpose, and another key would be the file. After providing the purpose and file parameters, we would need to choose some test file that we want to upload, for example, this one. And after that, we would click initialize. It says that this file was uploaded, but yes, it already has status proceed. It means that it's been successfully uploaded inside the Bubble store, inside the OpenAI. There can be different statuses like in progress and failed. So in theory, we can upload inside the vector storage and just inside the code interpreter assistant only files that has status proceed. But the most important, we get the file ID. After uploading successfully our file, we need to modify Assistant and add these IDs inside. So let's create a separate modify Assistant API where we would provide not all the parameters, but only necessary. So for code entrepreneur, it would be this parameter. So we would say that tool resources include code interpreter file IDs. So let's delete this comment and make this list a dynamic value. Take our test data from uploaded file and paste it inside our key parameter here. Ensure that this file inside the double quotes. Reinitialize call. Okay, we have invalid body. Let's check what's wrong. Content interpreter has this. So yes, we are missing one more. I think curly brackets. Let's initialize again. And it's been successfully uploaded. So now we can see that inside tool resources, we have file IDs and this file. Oi, we need to click save. So let's do it again and click save. Now we need to reinitialize our retrieve assistant with the same assistant that we were using here. So we would get the information about the IDs as well. Or maybe it already was there. So let's just check. So yes, it doesn't have it here. So we would need to reinitialize it. Save, and in updated, we have the information about file IDs. So now we can go and retrieve information about all the IDs uploaded to the code interpreter. So we could have a list. Let's say it would be just a list of text, and then it would be parameter parent group retrieve assistant tool resources code interpreter file IDs. So it would just be a list of all IDs that has been uploaded inside this assistant. Let's add a text parameter there, just retrieving the ID. So we would say when input value is changed with drop-down assistant, we would navigate on the same page of admin and send the parameter of new assistant. So it would be with drop-down value unique ID. So let's test 5. And we can see that it changed information here. And inside our instruction and names. So we can enable file search and build our front end to actually upload our files. Let's build a pop-up. Name it upload file. Say it would be 700 maximum. We would have the file uploader. In theory, we can upload multiple files, but then we would need to create a backend flow for that. In our case, let's just have a flow when we can upload only one file at a time. And then if you want to upload another file, you would need to do it again. So attach, say something like that. Put a gap between them. So file uploader code. And when we would click on the attach button, we would run flow of the plugin upload file, and the dynamic value would be from the file uploader code value. Then we would also hide the pop-up after clicking that and refresh the page. So we would update the value here. But just uploading file is not enough, like we were doing. So we need to modify the assistant and attach this file. So we would say that modify assistant copy. Let's say name it. It would be not the copy, but code interpreter. modify code interpreter. Assistant ID would be the same, get data from page URL, assistant, type of the assistant, and it would be ID. And the files would be following. So first of all, we need to provide all old files that we already have uploaded in this assistant. It would be let's actually make this pop-up data source of assistant, retrieve assistant. So we would be able to retrieve assistant information dynamically here too. So it would be parent group retrieve assistant file IDs plus ID of this uploaded assistant, step 1 ID. But it's not enough. We need to have all of these values in double quotes and separated by comma. So what we need to do is use format as text. Click here on the content to show for list item, put double quotes and this text. And divider would be comma plus space. This should work and provide all of the previous file IDs and the new one. But the thing that, as I mentioned before, uploaded file should already have status proceed. And in our case, we want to use the backend of the bubble. So we would check the status of this file. What I will do for our tutorial is just to have a delay. And we will upload small files, so they would be uploaded basically immediately. But if you want to do it with any kind of file size, there's actually also a file size limit for the purpose training of assistant, but I will mention it a bit later. So you would need to use a backend and use another API call to check status of the file uploading. But in our case, let's just do delay of 2 seconds, and it should be enough to have status uploaded already of this file. Let's check what the issues we have. Canvas toggle. Yes, so because in this assistant we didn't have the tools enabled and I reinitialize the call, you can see that there's going to be an error now. So let's do again, enable it, test 6. Let's go now data, test 6, copy ID, go in our retrieve information of the assistant, provide this ID, reinitialize, and we should have it again. So errors disappeared, but now we have issues with file IDs because in this reinitialized version we didn't have any information about that. So we need to provide an ID assistant on modify system code interpreter and upload some file there. Now we can see that it has information, and again reinitialize retrieve assistant. So we would have both information about the code interpreter IDs and also tools. And it solves all our issues. So now let's open our pop-up. So when someone click on the files code interpreter, what we would do, first thing, we would display the value inside the pop-up of the parent group, and then we would show this pop-up. Let's try to test. We already can see that one of the files populated because we uploaded it via API inside the API connector here. Let's try to upload another one. I will click on the upload file, provide a file, and click on attach button. It should upload it into OpenAI and then upload it in this assistant and refresh the page. And as you can see, now we have 2 files in our assistant. To remove these files from the assistant, we could use the same API call to modify it, but instead of adding one more call, where is our attach button, here you can see that we do +1 item of this code, we would just do -1 and refresh the page. So let's change this repeating group a bit. Row, provide an icon to delete. So by clicking on this icon, we would use the same modify assistant code interpreter. Again, assistant ID would be from URL, assistant, type of assistant, and it would be an ID. And instead of adding +1, we would remove current ID of current cell. So it would be, let's say, data source of, we can take just copy this expression here in the group, paste it here, then find tool, file IDs, minus item of parents group text, because we specify that data type of this repeating group is just a text, but this text represents the ID of the file. So, and like in the previous step, we will do format as text, provide double quotes, and inside this double quotes, we would have value of the text, and a divider would be comma plus space. And after that, we would refresh the page as well. So now we can not only add files, but delete them as well. And you can see now we have only one file attached to the code interpreter. For file search tool, it's slightly different process. So first we need to create a vector store for this assistant if it's don't exist. Then attach this vector store to the assistant. And after that, already upload files and attach these files not to the assistant directly, but to the vector store that we created previously. To create vector store, we need to use this API call. Let's just copy URL endpoint, create another API call, create a vector store. It's post data type, paste our URL, remove extra space, use as an action, and it should do it. Initialize. We created our vector store. Then, after creating vector store, we need to attach this vector store to our assistant. To make it easier, we can create a vector store and attach vector store to the assistant in the beginning of the process when we click create button. So let's just modify our create assistant API. Let's move it back, expand, and we will provide not only model, but another parameter of the tool resource. Tool resource would include file search, vector store ID. So we would just replace this parameter with dynamic one. And as you can see, that vector store IDs is a list. So one assistant can have multiple vector stores for one file search, but in our case, let's just do one. So it will be a dynamic value and we can dynamically populate. So then we need to modify slightly create assistant button. First, instead of creating assistant, we need to create a vector store. We can find it in our actions, create a vector store. Then we would provide the ID of this vector store to our assistant, result number 1 ID, and that's it. Basically, we modified it. So let's try to click this button. We can see that it creates a vector store, attach vector store to the new assistant, create data type assistant, and navigate on the page. Now we need to reinitialize our assistant so it would have information about vector store as well. As you can see now, manual enter, there's no information about vector search, and we can't populate it dynamically in our left sidebar. Let's create new assistant. Modify the name, instruction, enable file search, code interpreter, upload some file there. So it would already have all this data, and we would not have this issue again populated. Attach. Now, after creating new assistant, we know that it's already created file vector store by default. So now let's just go in our data, copy ID of this assistant, and reinitialize assistant, retrieve assistant API with this new assistant. And we can see that now we have new information about vector store IDs. Save it. And we can populate this information, let's say, under the toggle. So we would say that parent group IG of assistant vector store first item ID, because in our case we will just use one vector store. It's possible to upload multiple of them, but let's just stop on one. So it has a vector store here, and even for new created assistant, it will create new vector store as well. So now we need to upload files and attach these files to the vector store of current assistant. We can duplicate existing pop-up with upload file for code interpreter and slightly modify it. So let's copy this workflow, paste it with workflow, rename it for file search. After creating the pop-up, we need to add another API call to attach actual files that we upload into vector store instead of just attaching it to the assistant like we did for code interpreter. So let's another call. It would be post. This is the URL. Attach vector store to a file search. Then let's put vector store ID in the square brackets, make it action, uncheck private, and inside our body, let's actually just do parameter here instead of body. It would be file ID, and that's all. Copy our vector ID here just to initialize the call, and some file ID. Remove this quote, initialize call, and we successfully uploaded, attached the file ID to this vector store. Save it. And now inside our pop-up upload file search, after attaching, it would upload file as well, add a pause, but the third step would be not attach this file to the code interpreter, to the assistant, but it would be attach vector store to the file search. So we would provide the vector store ID by doing parents group vector store first ID, and file ID would be first step ID. Now we can display the files that are stored inside this vector store as well. But first, let's try to test it and add some file directed to the file search. So it's enable. Yes, we need to add an action to open the pop-up. So first step, like we in previous, we would display the information inside the pop-up. It's file search, data to display parents group, and then we would show this pop-up. Let's test it again. Click on the file, attach a file, and click attach button. Now this assistant should have inside the vector store this file. To display all files that has been successfully uploaded on the vector store, we need to use the next API files of vector store. So we would use this URL endpoint, get request, and use as the data. Let's reinitialize it. And we can see that inside we can see all the files IDs that has been uploaded on this vector. Now we can display these files the same like we did for the code interpreter. Let's copy these repeating groups and provide the information about that. So instead of data source would be different, we would use get data from external API and files of vector store and provide our vector store ID. We can just copy it from here because we displayed it previously. And data source would be all the data, each item ID. Let's refresh the page. And we can see that this vector store has one file uploaded. To delete some files from the vector store, we would need to use another API call with request type delete, use an action. We would provide the vector store ID and the file ID that we want to delete. So I just copied the vector store from here and file ID. And let's initialize the call. We can see that deleted is true. It means that it was successfully removed from the vector store. So if we update our page now, we should not have any files in our vector store. So actually, let's modify this. So after clicking on delete button for files of the vector store, we would use delete from vector store. File would be just a parent group text. And the data source of the vector would be our assistant information, vector first ID. And after that, let's refresh the page to update the display. So let's delete it. And now we don't have any files attached to the vector store. We finished with all APIs related to the creating and modification of the assistant. Now let's create a simple chat and chat with our assistants. Let's just drag a group. Do a repeating group here, displaying on the messages. It would be do a search for all messages, whereas yes, we didn't create a chat. So actually, let's just not have any chats. So it would be just messages with assistants. So it would be assistant equal to the get data from the page URL, assistant, type assistant. From this side, we would have current cell message body. And on the right side, so we would have the message of the user. So it would be visible only if this current cell message type is user. And this body would be visible only if the type is AI. By default, it's not visible. Let's also make some background so we would see the difference. It would be, let's say, slightly blue. Add some paddings. And that's all. Now also add another group with an input inside. Input would be send a message. It would be the role. So here we would type our question, click button send, and created another message. So when we click send, we would create the message. Assistant would be again assistant from URL. Body would be an input, send a message value. Type is user, and current user is our user. After that, we would reset relevant inputs to update the value from here. Let's actually also put some paddings here from the left side and right. And after that, in theory, we need to send request to the to our assistant and get the response from there. You can see how it works in the playground. So if we send a message hi, we can see that it's create a thread, add a message inside the thread, and then run a thread. So let's create these APIs. So we can see that we have this create a thread, API. It gives us thread ID. After that, we will need to add a message by using this API, providing the content with the role user. In the response, we get the message ID. After that, we need to run assistant on a thread. It would include the thread ID and an assistant ID, but after we sending this run, status would be queued. So we would need to run a backend flow that would check the status, and we would retrieve the last message of this run when the status is completed. So, except these three APIs, we would need also another to check the status and to get a message. So let's connect all together. You can pause the video and check off these APIs if you need to. After creating the messages, let's enable our backend flow and create a new API workflow that would be send a message. In send a message, we would need information about the thread ID and about the assistant. So let's add the parameter. Assistant would be an assistant type, then thread, and it would be text. So in our plugins, we can see add a message action. We will take the thread ID. Actually, we can do it in our application after that, so we don't need it. We would need to use our run action by using thread ID and assistant ID. Then we would create another flow that would constantly check status. Check status of the thread ID. Let's return in our workflow, and in the button send, we would have a modification like this. So after creating a message and resetting the input, we would run a flow to create a thread if it doesn't exist. So get data from page URL, thread is empty, and if it's empty, then we would send this parameter. So it would be assistant and thread. So thread would be step 3 ID, assistant would be get data from page URL assistant. And instead of being here, we can add it here. So when it's empty, we would create a message, create a thread, and navigate it on this page. But also we would run a API workflow, send a message, where assistant is the one from URL, thread ID would be from step 3, and schedule would be date, current date, time. We can ignore privacy roles here. So it would create a message, then run send a message. But if thread ID would be not empty, then we would create a message, not do this action here, but take this parameter from the URL, get data from URL, thread, and that's all. We would not need this action as well. So inside the send message, edit workflow. So we would run a thread on this message. Check again. Yes, actually, we forgot to add a message inside the thread. Add a message after creating a thread. We add a message to the thread ID, and content would be from the first step, body. The same is when it's not empty, but here we would take the thread ID from the URL. and content would be the same from the step 1. Now inside the send message backend, after sending a run, we need to check the status. So status, and we would create a loop again to send it for the status. Let's check what are the parameters. To check a status, we need thread ID, a run ID. So it would be thread ID and run ID. So we would loop it only if get data from external API, check run status, thread and run ID, status is viewed. And we would send the same like this and thread current date time. So, but when it's will be not queued, we would create a message. Actually, we need also provide information about the system because we need to create a message for that. Assistant and user. So here after sending a message, we would trigger an API workflow of the status. Thread would be thread. Run ID would be step 1 ID. Assistant would be assistant. And here we need also user. Current date time, ignore. So when it will be not queued, connect assistant, and body would be again get data from external API. It would be get message of the thread. I think it should be data first item content. First item text value, but we will see. It will be not queued. So here basically we create a loop, but we have settings in our API saying that it can be maximum 10 times loop. It's to prevent some infinite loops activities. We can increase it if we want. Let's just do it. And that's all. So user would be current user here, and here the same. Now let's test our chat, but for this we would need to have the paid plan. You can enable 14 days of starter plan subscription, and after that you will be able to test it with backend. So let's say hi, we would send a message. We don't have the loading indicator here, but we are getting the response. As you can see here, and AI replied to us. So the content would be, hello, how can I assist you today? So for statuses, let's slightly modify it and say that status is not completed, and here only if it's completed. Let's try, say hi, and we get the response. So let's try to upload our file. It's security bubble. In this file, we have some information about security from the bubble documentation. So let's test if this assistant can actually reply to us about something about the security. You can also add some loading indicators, so a user would understand that something is happening right now. So the uploaded document security bubble PDF covers various aspects. So as you can see that our assistant works. So at the end, we were able to create assistants via API, modify them with name, instruction, model, enable file search, code interpreter, and upload files directly to the assistant, create a vector store, and attach some files to the vector store and attach this vector store to the an assistant. After, we were able to also create a chat with live response. Thank you for the attention, and if you have some comments, you can leave them down below, and happy building.